today. It's an honor and privilege to be with this panel. I'll let Greg move this through. We want to share some work that we've been conducting on an instrument that we call the COIL, the Critical Online Information Literacies instrument. This builds up off of other work. As you'll see, this is research that's been conducted that's moving across our two dissertations. So some of us have asked, like, how do you actually do that? And we've tried to partial that out between the two of ours. But I think, and Greg thinks, it's a tremendously fascinating, interesting developments that we've found. The rationale is, first of all, we fully understand that our students are moving from page to screen. Increasingly, our students are using informational text. There are severe questions about their ability to effectively analyze, critically evaluate, think deeply about this text and how they would actually use this. Our research shows that they're frequently fooled and they're deceived when they try to use this informational text. That's usually problematic. A number of reasons. If our students are using this for academic pursuits, personal needs, health topics, we have problematic pieces that will occur. Go ahead. We built up on previous research, obviously, new literacies of online reading comprehension. We also took assessments and instruments that were already out there in the field. Our colleague, Karita Keeley, who was here last year, a work done by Brum, Russell, and Weems, and then obviously work that we had conducted at the New Literacies Research Lab. Our initial intent was to measure the constructs of credibility and relevance as they apply to informational text. Go ahead, Greg. So ultimately, the research question is, what are the levels of validity and reliability as students read online, and how can we measure those critical thinking skills and make sure that we're actually doing what we think we're doing when we build this instruction? There are 3 stages of development, and that's the way that we organize the paper. Right now, I will be very, there's a lot of information that we'll go through in the PowerPoint. You need to read the paper, okay? I think it's good. It will be better.
Well, if you need to sleep, you need
if you can't sleep late at night, you can pull the paper out. By page 3, you'll be out cold. So stage 1, we obviously identified the constructs and subconstructs and tried to develop items. Then we went to stage 2, which was where my dissertation happened, and that was the initial pilot of the instrument and tried to validate it. And then stage 3 went into Greg's, where we refined the instrument, and then we went through the students with his dissertation to further develop the instrument. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead. So what are we measuring? The constructs, initially, we looked at credibility. So we defined credibility in terms of, most specifically, the subconstructs. We look at author, source of claim, bias, content, argument, and accuracy. There's obviously numerous ways to look at credibility. First of all, there's numerous ways to look at critical evaluation, obviously. There's numerous ways to look at credibility. We defined that using those subconstructs. There are many, many more, but through the content validation with our experts, we came upon these and we had to tweak them. Go ahead, sir. Relevance was our second major construct under critical evaluation. We looked at relevance as being formed by the subconstructs of relevance of topic, relevance of the website, evaluating purpose, and evaluating currency once again. Go ahead, sir. The content validation stage, we put it through a panel of experts. These experts included professors and graduate students that were familiar with research and critical evaluation and online information. We rated the dimensionality of the 20 multiple choice items and created a CBI. We obviously had to have, did I put the CBI yet? 0.70 in order for us to pass from one round to the next and be included in the pilot of the instrument. We also had some extensive revisions were made to the items. We detail these in the paper. Quite frankly, and Dan Hickey brought this up at AERA, there was disagreement on the part of the experts as to what the constructs were, how we were measuring them. So even within our expert panel, there was difference of opinion as to what these different constructs and subconstructs would be and how they look in the items. That's problematic. Go ahead, sir. So this is stage 2. This is coming into my dissertation. I worked with 197 students from a low SES district in the Northeast. Students had a 90-minute period to take the assessment. The initial assessment was built in Google Forms, and we put it up on Google Docs. Basically, the students would sit with a MacBook. They had 90 minutes to complete the assessment. They had a paper copy where they would put down their answers because it was problematic to figure out how to negotiate the assessment, and then look at that, and then also answer within the computer screen, okay? So they had a paper copy to answer the 20 multiple choice. Go ahead and play. This is what it looks like. This is one of the items, but what will happen is, you don't need the audio. What will happen is you'll have an initial prompt, and it's in Google Docs, as you can see. You'll have an initial prompt, but what I think the fascinating part about this is the answer choices that we gave the students were web pages. So we have screen captures of individual web pages. For some of the web pages, the screen captures, we included the URL. For some of them, we did not include the URL. It matters what we were trying to measure. For some of the web pages, we included all of the information, all the informational text. Some of them we did not. Some of the web pages, we highlighted certain areas. Some of them we did not. What I would like to point out from this is that there's a lot of information, and it seems to be, at least from my perspective, a theme that's been running across this week, is trying to figure out differences in text and differences in multimodal elements of text and how those important variations affect our students as they try to read, especially as we move to online text.
And for those of you we've all made multiple choice items before, you're supposed to have the shortest little distractors ever. Now we have entire pages as distractors, and like, what's that do?
But the magic of that is our students need, as has been pointed out, next slide please, our students need to be able to search and sift quickly through these textual pieces. We don't want them to dig down deep in. We have to get very snap judgments as to what the right and wrong answer is. So I had 3 steps of analysis. In all honesty, there were 4 steps, but it was not important for this paper. The initial descriptive analysis to see what was actually happening, to see how the results looked, was the data actually appropriate to be analyzed. Step 2 is an exploratory factor analysis to see what items were loading and where they were hanging. Step 3 is a testing of reliability to see these scales that loaded and where the items hang, how consistent they were with each other and to the construct. Yes, sir? I apologize for the screen capture, but what's important here is this is the initial descriptive analysis. So we have items 1 through 20 and how many students answered incorrectly. But what you'll notice is that, for the most part, most of our students were getting questions answered correctly. So if you look at this, this instrument should work. I'm a closet psychometrician. If we look at this instrument really, really should work. Go ahead, sir. Your results of the EFA, if we look at the different pieces, you'll see that, some of them will hang on factor 1, some will hang on factor 2. You can go into the paper and look more in detail. The real important part to me is this extra residual variance that's still there. So even as I'm going through and saying that these are explaining variance and they're loading on certain factors, and some were loading, they're not loading very strongly, but the extra variance that still is there means that we're not explaining a lot of what's important about reading comprehension. We're not explaining a lot about what's critical evaluation. So if you look at the instrument, it should work. But, public affairs is looking for you. There's extra residual variance that's not being explained. Go ahead, sir. So if we look into the reliability, when we ran the EFA, basically it suggested that we had the 2-factor extraction, which is fine. So we pulled each of the 2 factors and visually inspected them. And the first factor, I'm doing good on time. The first factor is basically loading on credibility. We looked at a cutoff level of 0.30. It's acceptable for research, or it's not. So we looked at the, go back please. Sorry about that. I was patting myself on the back for being good on time. So these are the items that are basically loading within credibility. That one scale was acceptable for research. It barely reached the cutoff level, but it seemed to be acceptable for research. All the items are all listed in the paper, but you'll have certain items that will say, which author is the most knowledgeable about volcanoes, which website uses strong words, phrases, and images to influence the readers. But for the most part, these are the ones that we wanted to load on credibility. Go ahead, sir. The second scale, these are ones that, for the most part, were supposed to load on relevance. There was a mix of items. They weren't entirely there, but the problem was as you load it as a scale, it was below the threshold of 0.30, so we could not include it in future research. which could be problematic if that's one of the major variables in your dissertation. Go ahead, sir. This is you?
Yeah, so basically, looking at the coefficient alphas in our first round, they're below 0.2. They're basically, we're measuring a lot of noise. Basically gave an instrument, they did well, but it was just noise. So I had to do the same instrument, but luckily he got to mess it up first, so I got to refine it. And to make it easier, I reduced the number of scales and subscales. I made the distractors easier to recognize, and I had to simplify the test format. Maybe the transfer of the images to the paper, the opening up, like there were little thumbnail images that you had to click on to open to make larger. So there was a lot of steps that kids had to do to get the answer right. And so I decided just to do credibility. And there's some practical reasons to do that. Less constructs, easier to raise reliability. And then also, but theoretically, all of the work we've done with making online reading comprehension assessments as our little testlets and performances, whenever we do the factor loadings, the items that we have measuring relevancy seem to load more with locating than critical evaluation, because it's maybe the kind of judging the relevancy of something doesn't take as much cognitive processing as judging, the authority or the credibility. Maybe relevancy is just an easier thing for kids to do. So I just decided to focus just on that. So I did author, bias, publisher, and source, and I used the same kind of content validation methods. And then I did a series of cognitive labs with 8 students to test them out to see what was going on, since I wanted to see, did my item format work? So I grabbed 8 students, and using structurally prompted think aloud and screen recording, I got to see, and revise my instrument. Go ahead. And hit play. So I'll go back. Sorry. You have to click on this thing. Ban is fired. I guess it doesn't work.
I'm not technologically savvy.
Yeah.
Murphy's Law.
I'm a digital immigrant. It's back up there. There you go.
So, and I had different formats. This is an example of one with 4 screenshots, and they were looking at source. So I highlighted the source and told them what is more reliable. One of the other formats I had was just, here's a single page where the letters, and this basically violates every rule that we have about comprehension assessment that's been developed over, the past 80, 90 years. Distractors in different orders, different lengths. But that's what, we're trying to make it ecologically valid to the internet. And then there's that example. And then the last kind I had, an example with 4 actual links. Which website uses strong words, phrases, or images to persuade the audience? And then they had the actual websites. And what I did is we recreated these, and they're hosted on part of our other grant project. They're websites that we recreated and host on our local server, because the other problem with the internet is the web pages change constantly. So I had to we basically used a program, copied the websites, and put them on our own server. So from the cognitive labs, all the students reported that they preferred opening websites in tabs rather than windows. That was one of the, we go through these arguments forever. Most of the kids in middle school now, tab browsing is older than them. And they prefer tabs over windows, where a lot of us, not me, but a lot of folks are still in a multiple window world, where they have different windows open. So I switched to that. The items I had to use easier distractors. Obviously, recognizing elements of persuasion was difficult for the students. Understanding how point of view, how people shape truth was really difficult for students. Then I gave it to 131 students. Now, because Ian only did in low ESS school district, I thought maybe, well, let me mix it up. And I did high, medium, and low to see if that had any kind of play in the factor. Granted, I didn't have a sample big enough to actually find it out. If I would have to triple my sample to see if there were differences based on SES, but that I wanted to just try it. They basically took a 12-item assessment during rigorous graduate classes. I brought in 25 laptops, and they did on Survey Monkey. Go ahead. Well, I doubled our coefficient alpha to 0.43, but it was a problem. I can't do anything with that, and I still had a dissertation to do too. And using Spear and Brown's prophecy, basically I'd have to increase by a factor of 3. And I couldn't give the students, 50-item assessment, so that didn't work. So I gambled, and I said, let me just double the assessment. I'll make 15 more items, and just cross my fingers and pray. So go ahead. So I made 16 new items for each, so 4 for publisher, author, bias, and source, and then I just mirrored the same items that I already had and gave it to them again. So what happened, basically, with 27 items, the alpha was 0.560. I looked at any item where less than 20% got correct, I deleted them, and I got up to 0.618. Then I looked at the inner item correlation matrix, and anything that had a negative inner item correlation, I deleted those, and that got me to 0.713. And then SPSS has that nice little table. If items deleted, this was what will happen. And so we ended up with 0.722. Low? Yes. Good enough for my community? Yes. So that was fine. And what you see here is these are just the item descriptives. Some spelling mistake there. And the item formats didn't seem to matter. What is the author items, where obviously people do, it's easier. Where do I click to find an author? So my scaling, we didn't get the chance to do any scaling yet, but it seems like these might scale very well, where, locating an author, locating a publisher is easier. And there is, 4 screenshots, 4 links. The format doesn't seem as interdependent as I thought it was going to be. But we'll find out as soon as we find somebody who can do. We've reached our level of ability to, do stuff with items. All right. So we ended up with a valid and reliable measure of 7th grade students' ability to evaluate websites, but we need to know how does test format and demonstration and difficulty, how is that affected by the kind of links, using the 4 links, using the reading level of websites. There's so much in there. And we need to look at, item response theory and Roche modeling. We don't know how to do that, so we have to find somebody to work with. And I think this gets to the point where we really have to challenge the idea of the single researcher, especially for dissertations. We wanted to study online spaces, but I had to make 6 different instruments just to do a dissertation. But and so we're reaching levels of complexity that you can't use a single researcher model for a dissertation, and we have to, as a field, think about, well, maybe, what if I got to team up with a psychometrician and a qualitative researcher and work on one dissertation together? And that's what we all do when we have a grant. Yet we have a single researcher model to train us. It's backwards. All right, off the soapbox. And then our further investigations is we also need to look at the situated nature of all these. It's multiple choice. It's obviously decontextualized.
You're good.
Okay, that's obviously decontextualized. We have this great idea where we'd love to, create either, we don't have the programming experience to make a video game, but using a social network in Voki, which is like you can record these little avatars, make one avatar like a coal mining conglomerate, and one avatar like an Audubon Society and average Joe, and have people give the sources like, climate literacy is a joke. Look at this website I found. Everything on it is so wrong. Here's how it's biased. And then they go talk to the Audubon Society and they say, oh, look at this report I did. Look, I proved that climate change is, And so if we contextualize it and then look at their paths and do it that way and look at their evaluation of sources in the products that they create as they write, it'll be interesting to see how well do those correlate with a decontextualized multiple choice test.
And I think one major takeaway that I've had from all this is that, obviously I come from a land where we know that literacy changes as a result of technology. We know that these changes are occurring. I would also argue that assessment is changing. Assessment is, drastically changing, and we need to conduct research to identify what those changes are. Because this assessment that you look at on paper should work. But we are still, and it's not even just, there's a lot that we don't know or understand about online reading or informational text or websites. Like, we all understand that, I get that. But just the practice of assessing that, what does it mean when you're scrolling down, as Greg said? What does it mean when you're clicking on the About Us page? What does it mean when there is a subtle nuance of, language within text? What does it mean for design elements? We know that kids are tapping into, images and pictures. What does it mean when they view a video? What does it mean with the aesthetics of the page, how the page is lined up? These are all variables that we need to see how that affects item discrimination and item difficulty in order to really assess online informational text.
Thank you.